Medieval punishments were designed to shock, terrify, and be remembered. They were not meant to correct behavior. They were meant to control society through fear. In a world without modern prisons, psychology, or human rights, justice was public, brutal, and final. Pain was considered a necessary tool. Suffering was seen as proof of guilt and a warning to everyone watching. Punishment was a performance. Town squares became stages where authority demonstrated its power over the body. Crowds gathered not out of cruelty alone, but because these events were woven into daily life. Children watched, families watched, fear was taught early. One of the most common punishments was flogging. Whips tore skin in front of neighbors and strangers alike. The number of lashes depended on the crime, but survival was never guaranteed. Blood was visible, pain was deliberate. Another punishment was the stocks. The offender's hands and feet were locked in wooden frames for hours or days. The true punishment was not restraint, but humiliation. People threw stones, food, and waste. Some victims were beaten by the crowd itself. Justice allowed cruelty to become communal. Branding permanently marked criminals. Hot irons burned symbols into flesh. These marks erased anonymity forever. A branded person could never escape their past. Mutilation was common. Hands were cut off for theft. Ears were sliced for repeat offenses. Tongues were pierced or removed for blasphemy or lying. The body became a legal document. Punishment rewrote identity in flesh. More extreme penalties awaited those accused of serious crimes. Hanging was widespread. Gallows stood outside towns as constant reminders. Bodies were often left to rot, swaying in the wind. The smell of death was part of the warning. Beheading was reserved for nobility. It was considered a cleaner, more honorable death. Even execution followed class lines. Burning at the stake inspired the deepest fear. It was used for heresy, witchcraft, and perceived threats to religious order. Fire was purification through agony. Crowds watched as bodies screamed and burned. The belief was simple. Pain cleansed sin. Some punishments were slow by design. The wheel crushed bones without killing immediately. Victims lingered for hours or days. Iron cages held people suspended until death. Starvation, exposure, and madness followed. Justice did not hurry. Confessions were often extracted through torture. Racks stretched limbs beyond their limits. Thumbscrews crushed fingers. Water torture simulated drowning. Truth was measured by endurance, not evidence. Innocence meant nothing if the body broke. Punishment targeted not only criminals, but social control. Women accused of adultery, prostitution, or disorder faced public stripping, whipping, or shaving. Their punishment attacked honor as much as flesh. Children were not spared. They were beaten, branded, and sometimes executed. Mercy was rare. Fear was policy. Justice was immediate, visible, and unforgettable. Yet these punishments were accepted as normal. They reflected a world shaped by scarcity, religion, and absolute authority. Pain was part of order, and everyone knew what happened to those who crossed the line. As medieval punishments became more severe, they also became more symbolic. Each method was carefully chosen to reflect the crime. Justice was not only about pain, but about meaning. Public punishment reinforced hierarchy, religion, and obedience. In many regions, crimes against authority were punished more harshly than crimes against people. Treason, rebellion, or even disrespect toward a lord could result in extreme execution. Drawing and quartering tore the body apart in stages. It was designed to erase the individual completely. The message was absolute submission. Boiling alive was used in rare cases for poisoning. Victims were lowered into cauldrons of water or oil. Death was slow, unavoidable, and horrifying. The method reflected fear of hidden crime. Heresy was punished with fire. The Church viewed deviation as a spiritual infection. Burning destroyed both body and symbol. Ash left no remains, no relics, no memory to honor. Torture served a legal function. Under medieval law, confession was the highest proof. Pain replaced investigation. If a body could not endure, guilt was assumed. Survival was rare. Silence was considered defiance. Some punishments targeted isolation. Exile removed protection, identity, and safety. Banishment often meant death by hunger, cold, or violence. Lepers, criminals, and the accused disappeared beyond city walls. Women accused of witchcraft faced unique terror. Interrogation blended fear, superstition, and torture. Execution was often theatrical. Crowds gathered not just to watch, but to participate emotionally. Fear unified communities. It reminded everyone of consequences. Punishment also reinforced class division. Nobles received quicker deaths. Commoners suffered publicly. Justice reflected social value. Some towns competed in cruelty, using punishment to establish reputation and control. In others, punishment softened slowly as trade and stability increased. But mercy was never guaranteed. Children witnessed everything. Pain was normalized. Death was familiar. Punishment was education. The psychological impact was profound. Fear shaped behavior more effectively than law. People obeyed not because they believed, but because they remembered what they had seen. Medieval justice did not ask why crimes happened. It demanded obedience, not understanding. Poverty, hunger, and desperation were ignored. The system preserved power, not people. Some voices questioned this cruelty. A few scholars and clergy argued for restraint, but their influence was limited. Order mattered more than mercy. Over time, these punishments became symbols of an age defined by fear and authority. They reveal how fragile medieval society was. One crime threatened stability. One act of defiance demanded a violent response. The modern world is shocked by these punishments because it sees pain as injustice. The medieval world saw pain as necessity. To them, cruelty was not excess, it was protection. These punishments were not accidents of history, they were tools of survival in a harsh world. They shaped behavior, belief, and power for centuries. And they left scars, not only on bodies, but on memory itself. Over time, these punishments shaped the medieval mind itself. Fear was no longer something external. It lived inside people. It guided choices, silenced doubts, and crushed resistance before it could form. People learned to police themselves. A wrong word, a suspicious look, a rumor could be enough. Accusation alone was dangerous. Once named, a person was already half condemned. Justice did not require certainty, it required submission. Public punishment trained the population to accept suffering as normal. Pain became familiar. Screams became background noise. Death became instruction. Execution days were not interruptions of life. They were part of it. Merchants sold goods nearby. Children climbed for a better view. Life and death existed side by side without separation. The body was no longer private. It belonged to authority. It could be broken, marked, or destroyed to reinforce order. This created a culture of silence. People learned when not to speak, when not to look, when to disappear. Justice worked not because everyone agreed with it, but because no one dared challenge it. Even rulers were trapped by this system. Mercy was seen as weakness. Leniency risked rebellion. To rule meant to punish. To hesitate meant to lose control. So cruelty continued, generation after generation, not because medieval people were ignorant monsters, but because fear had replaced trust, because survival demanded obedience, because stability felt more important than compassion. Punishment also erased memory. Executed criminals were denied burial. Their names were removed from records. Their families carried shame for generations. Children inherited punishment they did not earn. Suffering spread beyond the scaffold. It infected entire households, entire bloodlines. Some crimes were imaginary: witchcraft, heresy, blasphemy. Belief itself could be fatal. To think differently was dangerous. To question was deadly. Pain enforced conformity. By the late Middle Ages, these punishments had shaped society completely. Fear became law. Pain became proof. Authority became absolute. The modern world recoils because it sees cruelty. The medieval world saw survival. It believed that without terror, everything would collapse. That without visible suffering, chaos would consume the land. And in many ways, that belief was true. Medieval life balanced constantly on the edge of famine, disease, and war. Order was fragile, so it was enforced violently. Punishment was the price of stability, but that price was paid in blood, in screams, in broken bodies and erased lives. These punishments did not just end lives. They shaped centuries. They taught obedience. They crushed resistance. They defined power. And they left a legacy that still haunts history. Because when fear becomes justice and pain becomes law, humanity itself becomes expendable. That is why medieval punishments still shock the modern world. Not because they were cruel, but because they reveal how far a society will go when it believes terror is the only thing holding it together.